Welcome to Brightly, You Radiant Being, the show that wildly recognizes, encourages, and invests in the radiance we all carry so you can shine your brightest. We're just a couple curious people interested in friendship, ideas, and personal development. This is a show that strives to speak to the curious, to those who long to explore new ways of thinking, reflecting, and being. Through sharing our experiences, friendship, and interests, we hope to impact you to step more brightly into yourself, inch by inch.
I love it. Hi, Amy.
Hi, Tracy.
It's good to see you.
It's good to see you too. We started out by saying, "How are you?" And I hesitated way too long. And Tracy said, "Maybe we just skip to it's good to see you."
Yeah, maybe it's one of those days.
And actually, it's a fine day. It really is. It's a fine day. So last week, we talked about the golden shadow, which honestly, I'm still like thinking about it, and just at odd times of the day it'll pop up for me like, ooh, golden shadow. And I don't know, are you thinking of it too still?
Yes. I mean, what it loved for me was reframing those moments of envy of other people that you
Yeah.
see publicly, privately, the little things that you like and elevate and put on a pedestal of other people, and flipping it on yourself that that's just your own submerged greatness, that
Yeah.
you maybe not everybody who interacts with that person also sees them that way, right? Like
Ooh,
it's a reflection of you.
I
And
hadn't even thought about that aspect of it,
yeah,
Tracy.
and
Yeah.
so not to make everything about me, but instead of feeling envious or feeling, having that little negative self-talk in your head, that voice who we named Chad or Brad last week personally for me, but having that voice be like, "Oh, see, they're doing it and you can't do it." Instead, it's like, "Oh, I'm seeing that because I can do it and I need to.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm not ready yet, but I could take that first step." And so it's always
Yeah.
excited to talk to you today on creativity.
Well,
Um,
and the funny thing is that I didn't even, it wasn't like when we were planning this, what, months ago, like
right.
we're going to talk about this and then we're going to talk about that. Like we do try to have an arc of conversation, but I didn't realize how well it would go with the golden shadow until I was actually just doing like, I want to touch on this and touch on that and touch on that. And all of a sudden I was like, oh my goodness, this is like the next step or
Right.
something.
Yeah. So like the golden shadow to me is like that lens in which you're seeing the world. And then what you're going to talk with us today is like how to manifest it, right? Like
Yeah.
how to put it
Well,
in the world.
I hope so. And I hope you're going to talk about it too, actually. And it's not just going to be me, but
Come
so
on, you've heard the show.
yeah, yeah. So this quote, I just want to start off with a quote from Brene Brown. The first time I read it, I didn't hear it, I read it. And um it was one of those moments. I don't know if you ever watched the show Allie Beale. Is that the name of the
Ally
show?
Beale.
Allie Beale.
Ally
Anyways,
McBeal.
Allie McBeal.
Hmm.
So what I loved about that show is there would be scenes and it would be, her perspective and somebody would say something to her. And then all of a sudden you'd see like literal arrows come shooting into her, like into her heart. And of course it didn't actually happen, but it was just a way to like make tangible how she was feeling on the
Yeah.
inside. And so when I first read this quote, that's what it felt like, oh, this arrow right in my heart. So Brene Brown says, unused creativity is not benign. It metastasizes. It turns into grief, rage, judgment, sorrow, shame. And for me, I think I used to always think like, well, if you don't use, if you're not being creative, you're just maybe not feeling it or whatever. And it's okay if I'm not creative for months on end. Well, guess what? It's actually not. And we're not just talking about like art, but certainly art is part of it.
Hmm.
Um, and
I can
so,
see why you would think that the topic of creativity is the next step from golden shadow or kind of follows a linear progression because it is about that submerged greatness, right?
yeah,
Like golden
Yeah.
shadow is part of shadow work. And so, yeah, if you're not recognizing your golden shadow, it's going to come up in other ways.
Yeah. And so, I mean, that's actually perfect because then, okay, I'm just going to segue right into Elizabeth Gilbert, Big Magic, where she says, the universe buries strange jewels deep within us all and then stands back to see if we can find them. Ah, like there it is again, the
And how
golden
many
shadow.
people, get stuck in life or at different points in their life, when they don't have like the next major milestone that they're working towards, how many of
Mhm.
us in our 20s into 30s just milestone, 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 and just doing what we believe we should or society has kind of impressed upon us to do.
Mhm.
But like, how many of us are like in those moments of introspection, of slowness, those gaps? Are like, what is my purpose here? What is the meaning of life? And her quote, like it's in us. We don't have to discover that. We don't have to name it. It's in us. You just have to be it. You have to let go of all the things that you've put on yourself, all the labels other people have put on yourself, and just be it. And not everybody's purpose is to be the next great leader. Some people's purpose is to just create what's in them. We all have our own individual gifts, and we keep I forget who the quote's attributed to, but the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Like you just have to create, and then that becomes something bigger in the world once
Right. And didn't we just talk about that too?
you
Wasn't that quote in a former
I'll bring
a
it up all
former life?
the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. I think about things like before the pandemic, sorry that I said the P word, how popular those group paint classes were where you get a bunch of friends together and you'd go and
Oh,
maybe you'd
paint
have a
clubs.
glass of wine. Yes. And
Yeah,
so
where
it'd
they
be
teach
like,
you how to paint and everybody paints the
yes,
same thing.
yes. And I feel like that was somewhat of an awakening for many folks. Like that was a very safe way to dip their toe into actual, like what people think of as artistic creativity,
I had
right?
opposite experience.
Well, I'm sure you did, but I do think some people it was
Oh,
like, oh,
absolutely.
and then they went on and kept painting. But tell me about your experience.
So the first time I ever went to a paint pub, it was for like a bachelorette party, and we painted this picture. And the only reason we picked the class was because of the date. And so we were painting these pictures of wine bottles, which for a novice painter who's never picked something up before to do dimension and depth and have this color palette and a topic, or not a topic, but the focal point for the painting to be something I knew I'm not going to hang in my own house, even if it did turn out
You
good.
don't even drink wine.
I don't drink any alcohol. So this is just, for me, that was just the experience. And my ADHD was just really heightened because I'm trying really hard to pay attention, but then we're also there to have a good time. And then it's not just a good time, we're celebrating the bride. If you're listening, it was a fabulous experience. Some of my favorite memories of that I've had come from that night. But so then I talked my family into, we got to go do this together. I have several family members who are incredibly creative and talented with painting. And I was like, we keep talking about trying to get together, instead of just hanging out at somebody's house, let's go do a thing, like in this location is in the middle for us. And my older sister chose her own color palette. And I didn't even think that could be a thing. And they weren't advertising it, but they also weren't frustrated with her. They had all the paints there.
Yeah.
And she, to the Girl Scout troop mother's chagrin next to us, inspired a lot of other little girls to do the same thing. But in my own head, I was like, I put these parameters on my own creativity. Like, I didn't need to. Like, how much more? Like, and I had already gotten my paint, so I was stuck with it. But it was like, yeah, why not make it match your home, your personality, your you? Then my other sister, who was in art school at the time and is an incredibly talented artist, did a black and white negative space portrait of my mother during the event. Instead of painting what we were all there to paint, just looked at my mom and used the only black paint and the white on the canvas and just like 9 lines, like she barely made any strokes, made this amazing portrait of my mother. And then I have a cousin who's also very talented, who's done like this perfect rendition of what's on the stage. And I'm still just looking at them being like, how do you know how wet to make your paintbrush?
But you know
Virgo,
what I love
this
about
is not a
that?
good outlet for my kind of creativity. Like,
But it was your idea.
and it was my idea. It was totally my idea. But I liked the structure of it. Like, I don't know how to paint, and we all like painting. And there were other people there who were in similar positions to me, but like, and everybody's turned out slightly differently, but slightly the same, and this and that. But for me, it was just like looking at them, and I'm like, wow, like you can tell the people who have embraced creativity in their life, not because they're talented artists, like that's a part of it. They've worked for that. But because they're so much embedded in their creativity, it just flowed through them, whereas
So
I was
I have to
there.
ask you then, do you feel like you have an outlet, a creative outlet? Do you
So
see yourself as creative?
I have a podcast, Amy.
That was so great. Oh, that's right. I have one too, Tracy.
Yeah, it's really good. I've heard it. I'm a big fan. No, so for me, whenever, because my sisters, most of my family, everybody that I invited to that event are pretty art and craftsy, and then there were other people who weren't there who make like their own greeting cards with like the chicka shape makers, as we call them in our family, the crickets or cry cuts or whatever they are.
Oh yeah.
and like we try and have like these sister Sunday days, or in the fall we all get together and bring whatever we're crafting on to my mom's barn and just like talk and work on a project.
Me about that.
Yeah. I mean, we haven't gotten to do it in a while because of COVID, but my response to everybody is always, I'm not that kind of crafty. Like I'm not good with my hands, but if I could just like, but like sitting and sketching out a story is not really like a sister Sunday task, right? Like I need to use I feel like I'm an ideas person or interior design. Like I can put things together that other people, have created. I can create stories. I can create new things from that. But in terms of like starting with a blank space in anything, even at work, I talk to my boss all the time, like just give me something, just a single sentence to work from, and I'll turn it into something completely different. Like it doesn't matter, but like I can't have a blank spreadsheet. I can't have a blank piece of paper. I just sit and stare at it.
Yeah, I get that. That is hard. And I think it was Nora Roberts who said, I can edit anything except a blank sheet of paper, right? So I get that. I think for me, what happens with a blank sheet or a blank canvas, a piece of fabric, is that there's too many possibilities for me to go in. And then I get stuck because I can't decide on which possibility. Now, the other thing that I've noticed, because I don't consider myself artistic, but I birthed artistic folk.
When I think of you, I think of artistic.
Well, okay, I got a lot of crafty things behind me. And so,
but I think of you as a creator.
Okay, I could see that. I'll accept that. But
you got to take it. I gave it.
Yeah, exactly. You gave it to me, so I took it. But I think where I feel my creativity comes out the most is in writing. But so if I'm writing fiction, what I find with me is that it feels as if I'm digging for the jewel, right? I've uncovered the jewel and I'm writing, and I can feel the energy building inside of me as I'm writing, and I'm getting like excited about what I'm writing, but it's almost as if the energy gets too high and then I just have to walk away. It's like, okay, I just gotta get up and walk away now. So I don't know if I think it's what Stephen Pressfield calls resistance. He wrote the book, The War of Art.
Okay.
So it's all about how resistance shows up for you anytime you try to do something creative. And so go ahead.
I would say, I think it's important to bring up, we've said it a couple of times, but in different ways, but not very directly, that creativity is not art. It's not just artistic. To me, it's making something, it's birthing something into the world. It's taking an idea or an image or something in your head and making it, like you said, a tangible thing. So for me, in the past year and a half, my creativity, I bake. And I'm not
Oh my gosh, those heart eye
yeah,
pies
so
that you made.
I don't necessarily make recipes. I still haven't figured out, or I don't really care to, the chemistry of it. I have an abundance of resources for delicious recipes. I don't feel compelled to do that, but I decided to use my Christmas cookie cutters to make Halloween shaped cookies last year, and I made like mummies and zombies and different things like that. And what you just said, I saw somebody on Instagram make heart pies with an eye in the middle, very Pan's Labyrinth. If you oh, I forget the name of the director, but that's kind of
I
the
can't
imagery.
remember either.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so
And
sometimes
wasn't it like an apple filling? So it was like the apple of my eye.
apple of my eye hand pie. Yeah, it was so great. I still don't know. I mean, my friends obviously, and you clearly on Instagram and stuff are like, oh my God, that looks cool. But the two people I gave them to in person, I haven't heard back from yet. So I don't know how creepy they were. I know they were delicious. I ate them for breakfast for a week. So I know taste isn't a factor. But so creativity can come in many ways. It can be the artsy painting, it can be photography, baking, drawing, pottery, gardening,
Dance,
like,
singing,
yeah,
playing an instrument.
writing a song, a poem. Like there's so many
Yeah.
different ways creativity can come out. Home renovation, interior design.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So
But I
creativity is
do
many
think
things.
I'll stand by, not my words, but Brene Brown's words, that I do think you have to allow the space for it to come out. Now, there has been times too, um, for me, where I feel like people outside of me, so people might say like, you don't really have time for that right now. It's not really a good time for you to be spending time on that right now, whatever. And so sometimes what can happen with that, then it kind of gets tamped down so much that then it's really hard to start doing it again. It's one of those things. I liken it to, pardon me, but my second child, when I was in labor, I go into the hospital, I'm in labor. They're like, okay, doctor's not here yet. Do these breathing, whatever. Luckily, my one sister was with me. She was my breathing coach. Um, Finally, it's like, oh, I'm ready. The nurse is like, yeah, you are. Doctor's still not here, so you can't push. So you got to do these breathing exercises. I'm
Tell
looking
me
at
you
her
live
like,
America without
no,
telling me.
seriously, like everything in my being is like, must push. And then I had to do these. So for 20 minutes, I did this breathing with my sister. Like I did not break eye contact with her, to not push, to totally not, to just kind of, oh, nope, we're going to tamp that feeling down. Finally, the doctor comes in. Okay, push. My body's like, no,
Nope, not you missed
no,
it.
nope,
You
missed
missed it,
it.
buddy.
Sorry, Mister
Train has
Doctor.
left.
So, anyways, that's what it kind of felt like. And there's times now I can write for longer, but I still feel that energy building up. So it's just a weird thing. But I think, what were you going to say? You looked like you were
Well,
going to say something.
see, but then that's the other thing. So for me, that's why I don't start is, oh, I'm not inspired, or oh, I have an idea, but nothing else is coming from this one sentence of an idea. And so I wait and I wait and I wait
Yeah.
for the muse, as they say. But then you have all these greats, or at least prominent people, like Stephen King, or I know there's a lot of artists out there that say, no, you have to make it happen. You have to
Yeah.
sit down, you have to have a schedule, and you have to have a process, and you just have to do it until it comes back.
Right.
And with that is recognizing that it's not always going to be great when you do that, but you're going to be consistent and you're going to be better prepared
Mm-hmm.
and more skilled when the
Well,
does hit. And
and
so
I
I'm
would
torn in
say,
like two ways.
right. I, for me, what's happened is I will get an initial boom. And whether it's a character, a scene, I get that initial thing. And then typically things will, from that point on, only come to me in the writing process. So I have to be writing for ideas to come to me.
Mm-hmm. You have to create that
Yeah.
flow. Creativity is all about energy, as most things. No, I heard a
Yeah.
great line from Hank Green on his vlog today in mid-April. He
Nice.
said he keeps a list of ideas that are not yet things but could be things. And he was talking more
Yeah.
about did you watch that today?
No, but I do that as well. I have
Yeah.
a whole file drawer of like, oh, this character came to me, but I have no idea what it's going to be for.
Or for me, some things are stuff that I have an idea, but I know I'm not the one who's going to actually make it. Like I have this idea I have a topic and I have things, but for how it's telling me it needs to be birthed, I either need to learn watercolors or I need to connect with an artist. Or there's just other things where I know, as
Okay,
with
that fascinates me,
yeah, there's a lot of
Tracy.
things. I think I've talked about this with you before, maybe even on the podcast. I just feel like I'm either here to connect people to them
Mhm.
or that I'm here to shepherd them. And I'm okay with that. And so that's helped my
Yeah.
creativity of just keeping that list. Like I have a little red file folder and I know where it is at all times. And every now and then I'll look through everything in it and be like, is it ready yet? And then it just reminds me like, no, you haven't met these people yet. I'm like, okay.
Wow, I love that. And I think people, I feel like, yes, absolutely, you're a connector. I, okay, we have to do a show on that or something like
And
that.
being a connector. It's
Yeah.
still something, for me, it's come up not just with creative things like that, but it's come up in such a way that when I was younger, I would feel a lot of guilt and shame around it. Like, why aren't I the thing, or why aren't other people connecting me to things? And
Oh.
then as I've gotten older and the people in my life um have given me feedback on how it's impacted them, like we're all more emotionally mature. I'm a lot older, and so I'm seeing like
Mhm.
how it's manifesting out in the world. But my Kundalini life path number specifically states something along the lines of I'm here to help other people in that way.
How do
And
you
so
get a
then that
Kundalini life path number?
oh, okay, that's sorry. We're talking about creativity.
Okay, we'll talk about that another
I
time.
don't. I know I've shared this with you, Amy, but my brain is a internet browser of 69 tabs, and I do a really good job most shows of not flipping back and forth between them. But creativity is in everything, or creation, right? Like there's a little bit of spark in everything. So for you, Amy, like I said, I see you as an artist. I see you as a creator. I see you as somebody who just makes things happen. And you have many of the hobbies that I listed earlier, the gardening, jewelry making, obviously, writing. What is that process like to you? Have you experienced not letting something out and having that grief that Brene talked about?
Oh, yeah, because for years I would sort of, I mean, I probably have a low level sense of grief right now just because I haven't published anything yet. For
Mm.
me, so let me take that back. The process of creating something is in and of itself a release. It's like putting your energy out into the world. And so there are times when the other day, I actually just started painting. I was just like, I don't know what I'm doing, but I got to put paint on this canvas. And I'm not a painter. My daughter is a painter. She she does oils, she does watercolor. She's the watercolorist for you. Anyways, but all of a sudden I was just like, I just felt like wanting to paint. And so I started to paint this water, this ocean, and it was just like these waves. And all of a sudden I went, oh, you didn't paint the top part with the waves. And so I just flipped it over and it became the night sky. And then I could go down from there. And then it became the night sky, a little bit lighter, and then like the sunset. And it's not, oh, it's my work of art. That's another point too. When people say, oh, that's a work of art, guess what? Everything you create is a work of art. There is no label that says this is a work of art, that's a piece of shit, right? It's a
Yeah.
work of art because it's art and I worked at it.
Well, and I mean, I think what is it, Mona Lisa Smile and Julia Roberts and her battle with the Kirsten Dunst's creator, like they have that early on for the first half of the film of who says what art is.
Right.
And I think you hit on the head, why Brené's quote is a thing, why it's not benign, why it metastasizes into grief or anger or sadness. You said it's putting your energy out into the world. And how
Yeah.
many people hesitate to do art because of that? Whether because there's a real or perceived audience at hand, potential judgment,
Mm-hmm.
or self monitoring of your own energy and how you're perceived in the world, like putting a barrier around you in that way and not letting yourself create is killing a
I
part of yourself. It's killing that energy flow.
yeah, it is. And I have to remember that. My father was a poet for, well, the,
His
you
life.
know, his life. And he never, ever even put anything he never tried to get anything published. And his poetry, well, works of art, right? But he always said to me, because I said, Dad, why haven't you ever like even tried to send it into the New Yorker or something like that? And he's like, because it's too personal. It's my poetry. It's not the world's poetry. It's my poetry. So he understood inside of himself. I don't think he felt lacking because he understood that it was him getting it on the page and then sharing it with my mom or me or my sisters.
Well, and do you have to have an audience? Like, I think creativity is hampered by the thought that it has to become something, right? Like, you could write a book and have a great book and just be happy that you wrote the book.
Could I?
But you have other goals. Like, there's different
Okay.
spectrums for
Okay. So then there's goals attached to that. So I really love the idea of just that energy, putting that energy out there. And I feel like that maybe can open people up to the idea of more things being creative than just, what we deem as art. So I think of even like, the people who we enjoy on TikTok or on Instagram, that's being creative. They're putting their energy out there.
YouTubers are called creators, content creators. Most people on social media and TikTok and stuff like that are called content creators. And I love that because they're creating stories, they're creating connection. Like, there's so many different ways that creativity is out into the world.
Yeah, they're creating sparks in us saying, hey, I like that. I want to do that.
So, we've talked about in the last episode, genius instigator, right? That's come up. But
Yeah.
we've also talked about like the zone of genius.
Yeah.
What is that from your own process, or what is that from?
No. So I heard this person on a podcast. His name is Gay Hendricks, and he wrote this book. He's done other books and he does other things, but he wrote the book, The Big Leap. And in it, he talks about we have these 4 zones. So it's the zone of incompetence. I think we all understand what that zone is, right? The zone of competence. So a lot of times when you're in the zone of competence, it's things like, I always think back of like when I worked at the library, I was really good at the photocopier. Like literally no one else understood it. It was like, I don't know how it works. And it's not like that was a zone of genius for me, but I was competent at it. So then they'd always call me to do it when actually I could have been doing something else. Okay. Then there's the zone of excellence, which I think so many people think that's like the pinnacle, right? Zone of excellence. You're really good at what you're doing. Maybe you're making great money at it. Maybe you're even feeling successful yourself, but there's still something missing. And then there's the zone of genius, which for him, he's like, that's your special gifts, your strengths that are uniquely suited to you. So he says uniquely suited to you that also help other people around you. So the first time I heard that, I was like, oh, I'm not in my zone of genius. And I feel like this ties in with creativity because I think that, and golden shadows, because I think in order to understand where that is in you, you need to do maybe a little deep dive. You
Mm-hmm.
need to think about what actually brings you joy and what you're good at. It's sort of like that a Venn diagram, right? Is that what it's called?
Yep.
Okay.
With the
Like,
overlapping circles.
yeah.
Yeah.
What are you brilliant at? What brings you joy and what helps other people, right? And it's that middle thing, that's your zone of genius.
And
So,
sometimes if you haven't identified that, or if you're
yeah.
not resonating with something you had identified as that, it goes back to, and we've talked about this in past episodes, so I encourage you to listen if you haven't, but just reach out to your friends, not the critics, but the people you trust, the people who make you feel good about yourself, and just say, hey, what is my zone of genius? What am I inspired? What do I inspire in you? Because creativity shows up in so many different ways, and you might be
Yeah.
surprised at how your Venn diagram shapes up.
Right. And maybe your creativity, maybe your zone of genius is like, oh my gosh, no one else can run a meeting the way you can run a meeting. Like,
Mhm.
it doesn't have to be like, oh, you're the next.
It doesn't need to involve glitter. Like,
I mean, I always want things to involve glitter, but that's a really good point. It doesn't have to involve glitter. And I think that people who like feel like, we hear people say like, oh, my job is soul crushing or it's sucking the soul out of me. Those are people obviously that are like in their zone of competence, right? It's not great. They're okay, whatever.
And I would argue that that's also an environment mismatch and a people mismatch. Because usually when you hate your job, you don't actually hate your employer, you hate your manager. Because
You
they
told
put
me that.
boundaries and walls and
Yeah.
limits on yourself. You don't leave an employer, you leave a manager. And so, let's say you just feel like you're in your zone of competence in your career and you're not feeling creative. Look at what those barriers are around you, kind of like my own, trying to paint by numbers, do follow everything, and just not having a good time. Looking at the people around me doing whatever
Yeah.
they want to do in their own zone of genius. And
Yeah.
wow, they just jumped right over that fence, didn't they? Like,
Yeah.
they
And
smashed those
not to,
boundaries
well,
and they're better for it.
yeah, I'm actually going to use a sport analogy, but
Ooh,
I
let's
think
see if I
about like,
understand it.
yeah, I think about football. I think about athletes, right? And so it doesn't have to be football and doesn't have to be men, but I think about athletes who are they're with a certain club, right? So they're with this organization, I think it's called. And their coach or they're at this level with this team, right? And then they get traded to another team and then all of a sudden they're like this
They're
superstar,
better.
and you're like, why didn't you play like that when you were with this team? It has to be exactly what you were just talking about.
Yeah, I worked for a Blockbuster Video. I'm gonna put them on blast because they don't exist anymore.
Yeah.
But I worked at a training location in a major metropolitan area. So anybody that got hired came to us for a minimum of 3 weeks, and then we sent them off. So obviously we had a handful of permanent staff there that were the trainers.
Mhm.
And it became a challenge when we had opportunities for promotion for those people, because the management would want to keep them in place, would only see what they're not good at. And so finally it was like, we don't know until we let them try. Like, it's not the same as them being in their role and just being told to do higher level tasks for no pay and no recognition. Like, let's actually give them that responsibility. They blossomed because they were allowed to have control over how they ran their shift, over how they did certain things, whereas
Mhm.
before they had to do it somebody else's way. And there was no right or wrong way for checking out a video, like we had some clear parameters for, don't insult people, but like there really was no way to inspire your team or your staff to get the stuff done for the day. The managers who did follow those, playbooks, so to speak, were not the favorite managers. It was the ones who could get that stuff done without you knowing you were following a playbook. And
Yeah.
so I've always used that. There's one woman in particular where she exceeded me. Like, and I was kind of in the middle of the wrong, I didn't want to, that was not my future.
That
Nor my
wasn't your zone of genius.
it wasn't my zone of genius. I was okay with that. It was a pit stop to pay some bills.
Yeah.
But she really just blossomed as soon as we got her away from a certain manager who, for whatever reason, couldn't get around her own bias and only saw certain limitations. And I think the same can be said around any creativity or any job, but I think you can be that person for yourself and not know it. Um, you were
Ta-
talking earlier about bravery and creativity,
yeah.
and I think it goes back to, sometimes when people ask what I'm doing, so I'm a recent homeowner. I'm about to approach, I think, my third summer, and so gardening is kind of new to me. And sometimes my neighbors will walk over and be like, "Oh, what you doing?" And I'll just reply, "My best." And I think that it exhibits to them in the moment, I'm feeling a little vulnerable. I don't really know what I'm doing, but I'm doing something. And I'm not going to tell you what the end result is because it's probably not going to look like that. So it also protects me in a sense too. But I feel like to truly be creative, to make something, stand by it, all of that, you do have to be brave or courageous with it. And I mean, that ties in with Brene Brown.
Yeah, you do have to be brave. And then to add on to that, if you're actually going to ship it out into the world, wow, do you need some bravery there too,
And you also
right?
have to let it go. John, like that was a big thing for me. A lot of my creativity stuff, I didn't share with anybody. I'd write stuff,
Mhm.
or like, it's a big reason why I don't journal. What if somebody finds it? And John Green has a quote, and it's from his mentor. So I'm gonna butcher it unapologetically, but it's essentially, once you put something out in the world, it's no longer yours. People
No.
get to make fan art. People get to decide what happens to the characters after your book ends. People get to
Mhm.
do whatever they want with it, talk about however, interpret it however, and it's all valid and okay. There's a lot of artists out there who won't interpret their poems for people, that their interpretation is what they keep private, and everybody else's interpretation is just part of the art, part of the process, and it's all valid and okay. And
That's
that
kind of cool and
terrifies
mysterious.
me.
Yeah.
I'm a
Well,
Virgo. There's a right and a wrong.
yeah.
There's black.
I can remember having a conversation with a colleague, and she was upset because she had come up with an idea and a person she worked with presented it as if they had come up with it and not just she had come up with it. And while I understood that frustration, I also did recognize, I was like, it's just an idea. You have to let your ideas be out there and to be grabbed by other people. Like you'll get other ideas. But also, and I think this again was Elizabeth Gilbert, like ideas are just floating out here, right? And I might grab at that idea and somebody else might grab at that same idea. And you might present things similar,
Oh,
but
how many
probably
times has a
different.
movie come out and then there's been a parallel movie from another studio
Yep.
that's identical? So like Friends with Benefits, No Strings Attached,
Yes.
Armageddon, Deep Impact. Like there's just something culturally, like we're all vibing here on this planet together.
That's
There's an
right.
energy, and that stuff is going to happen. When I was in sales, I really learned you don't have to be first, you just have to be best or different or unique. Like you can't let the fact that somebody else did something prohibit you from also seeing how you can do it.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Um, there was something else that I wanted to bring up from Gay Hendricks, and I'm not really sure. I have no segue for this, so I just want to bring it up because another thing that he talks about as to why like you don't allow yourself to live in that zone of genius
Mm-hmm.
is that we have what he terms upper limit problems. So he says like whenever something good or happy happens to people, they can't just live in that happiness. They have to like think of what bad thing might happen. And his 12-year-old granddaughter was actually explaining it to someone. So I'm just going to read. Let's see if I can read. She said, if you don't know it's okay to feel good and have a good time, you'll mess up when things are going well. And sometimes you won't even realize that you're sort of
Is
self-sabotaging the
it that whole
moment.
waiting for the other shoe to drop kind of thing?
Exactly.
Not being present
Exactly.
in the moment. Um, Brene Brown talks about that a lot in her books too. So if that's something you struggle with, I highly recommend her entire collection. But that's
Agreed. Mm-hmm.
yeah, you when when you do that to yourself, when you only ask like what's gonna go bad or like what haven't I anticipated happening, you're missing like what's could go better, what could go
Yeah.
great.
I know my one sister would always say, but if I think about all the bad things that could happen, then I'm prepared for them. And that's her take. For me, I'm like, I don't I don't want to be prepared for the bad things. Why do I want to be prepared for the bad things? Because if I'm prepared for the bad things, I'm expecting the bad things. And in my brain, if I'm expecting the bad things, I'm calling the bad things into me.
So it's all about mitigating risk for some of my day-to-day stuff. And so one way to kind of look at that, that's kind of the in between of both of you, is I can either think of every single specific thing that could go wrong, every single issue that could happen, and I could create a plan for each of those. Or I can create a resiliency in myself, in my systems, in my processes and things so that I have a net to fall into that I trust. That if
I
something
like
does go
that.
wrong, and
Hmm.
that I know that from that place, I can, tailor it in the moment. I trust myself enough to know me and that I'll get through it, that I can get through what happens.
Yeah.
And I think that's a more present minded focus. Not that I do that, but that kind of living, that kind of trust. Because also, like, how many times have you created a list in your head of the 23 things that could go wrong and none of those went wrong and it was number 25 you didn't consider or get to, and you still got through
Dang
it?
it.
Like
Yeah,
past you
exactly.
still did it. And
Well, and I have heard of this thing too, where you say, okay, think of the worst thing that could happen. And this is if you're trying to build up bravery to like put something out
yeah,
there, right? If you're a creator, if you are trying to ship something out there, what's the worst thing that can happen? Okay, this is the worst thing that can happen. Will you live? Yes. Okay, I can live with that, right? So there is sort of that balance too, because sometimes you do in order to get that bravery to put it out there, you do have to be like, can I live with the worst thing that'll
yeah,
happen if I
and
do
so
it?
it's about building that foundation. So it's about
Yeah.
knowing before you put yourself in a public arena what your limits are, right? Like that for us, we talked about that before we started podcast. Are we going to use last names? Are we going to mention our employer? What are we going to mention about where we live? What topics are taboo and completely off topic?
Mm-hmm.
And some people in this digital age, when it seems like everything about people is right there for them, celebrities, Instagrammers, all of that, some people find that as disingenuous. And no, you don't get all of somebody just because they created one thing for you to consume, right?
That's a
Like,
really good point.
yeah,
Yeah.
I absolutely hate journalists and the news have human interest stories. And so sometimes when things happen, good or bad, they'll reach out and people will be like, no, I'm sorry, like I don't want that on the news. I don't want to be on the news. And be like, well, people are interested, they want to know. I don't care. Like, I don't care that they're interested. That doesn't make it news, right? Like, create something, like, this is your profession. Create something else of interest for them. Like, create something
Yeah.
else for them to do. So I think it's okay, in terms of creating, to be like, all right, worst that can happen. Like, old tweets come up, cancel culture is a big thing right now. Maybe I'm not as socio aware as I thought I was. And so it's just recognizing, like, okay, like, here's how I'm going to respond in bad situations. Like, we've talked about it. If we get negative comments, who's going to respond? What's going to be our
Mm-hmm.
take? And, we haven't even really gotten positive comments. So, like, all that work that we did, like, I just wanted to make sure that we had a process in place so that when it did happen, we weren't scrambling and we could be in the moment for whatever happened, good or bad.
Right.
Um, But then as talking to you, we didn't really have anything in place, or if some agent contacted us and was like, hey, we want to feature your podcast, we want to represent
Dang,
you,
we got to
right?
get that in place.
We thought more of the day-to-day stuff, and we didn't think of ourselves in that zone of genius yet.
So
And
I
so
want
then
to
it's that.
ask you, sorry, I do want to ask you, do you think you know what your zone of genius is?
No, and I think that's okay, because I like that I bounce from thing to thing.
Yeah.
So my zone of genius rotates and changes. And I haven't found anything yet where I can do like that Stephen King mindset of just like make the time and do it. How about you? What's your zone of genius?
Well, so I would say I feel like this is your zone of genius.
I'll take it.
Yeah.
Why do you say that? That's very kind of you. Thank you.
Well, no, it has nothing to do with kindness and everything to do with it's just reality. So I say it because, well, first of all, I feel like without the way that you work and the way that you said, well, hold on, let's get this figured out first, and just sort of reined me in a little bit, or a lot bit, and then had us go through this process. Like, I don't think we would still be doing it if it hadn't been for you. And then also I feel that, okay, I gave it to you, you have to take it. So also, when we're on air, you are like a master at just like, well, so now that we've been doing this, what do you think? Blah, blah, blah. Like, I feel like you could just be on radio or something, or TV. So you've got this mellifluous voice. You've got perfect transitions. You're just, yeah. So I think you are in your zone of genius.
Thank you. You've helped me though get there, because I'm not a
Okay.
doer. I'm a planner and a preparer. If you follow the Clifton strengths, input is a big one of mine. So as soon as we started talking about podcasts, I went into a deep dive on the internet,
Input is one of your top five.
It's one of my top 5. Is it one of your top 5?
No.
I was going to be surprised if it was. But so then that helped me create that framework to operate under,
Yeah.
that you are the spark behind it that makes it happen and brings the
Okay.
warmth in.
I'll take that.
Yeah, I need something to respond to. I don't do well creating in a vacuum on my own. If I do, I get too controlling over it. And then I don't want to share it. And so when I partner with people and I make it about
Oh,
trying to bring out the best of them, and then also that helps the best of me come out, I'm less controlling with it.
so that's so interesting. I did, okay, that makes sense then.
Yeah. I don't like John Green's comment about like once you put it out there, it's not yours anymore.
You're like, oh, hell no, it's mine.
Yeah, it's both a liberating and I push back on it so hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I've learned professionally, because we've talked a lot about how creativity can show up in your career. I've learned professionally there's a lot of stuff that I want to do like that, where I want to go away in my zone of genius and make this perfect thing from all this input I've gathered, and then tie it up in a bow and give it to people. But they all have their own zone of genius too. And like you said, it's an idea. And so then it starts to splinter and go places. And so I've learned, stop doing all that pre-work and then getting frustrated or hurt or feeling like I'm not useful, because that none of it was necessary. It's not my company. I mean, there's 10,000 people in my organization, and the people I support are way smarter than me, which I'm glad to be in their shadow, their golden shadow. But so now I've learned to frame out the idea, allow myself to sketch stuff so that I still have stuff to draw from and pull as it's growing, but to incorporate other people and to allow that space for other people to take the idea
Mhm.
and make it grow. And it goes back to that bravery. Like, that's terrifying because you can't hyper prepare for that, right? Like, when you put things out in the world, you can't prepare for all the different ways it could go or what could be required of you next, and the
Right.
opportunities that could come from it. Like, that's a part of risk, right? Is like the opportunity of it.
Yeah.
You
And
could
I feel
land a
just,
major book deal, and then they could be like, Amy, I need a script for a movie. And now you suddenly have to learn script writing, or allow somebody else to take it and write a script, like, Success.
That would be, see, that's then where you do have to surrender, right? And I've thought about that because we fantasize, right? It's like, I'm going to write this book and then somebody's going to want to make it into a movie. And I'll be like, yeah, I hate that.
Hey,
Why
if
did that
Stephanie
person?
Meyer can do it.
Exactly.
Like,
Exactly. It's
I
okay.
think the thing about success with creative projects like this that we've been talking about is you have to start before you're ready, and you have to be ready to just grab an opportunity and go for it.
You know what? I always have so much more success and fun when I start before I'm ready. Because for me, if I prepare too long, I don't do it.
Yeah, I've been seeing a lot online lately about how it's like, let's say you want to do a thing. Don't think 10 steps into the future. Just do the first step and the rest will unfurl. You don't have to deep dive on the internet. You don't have to
Yeah.
become a master at it before you begin. If you want to.
Well, and I guess in a way, that's sort of like what I was talking about with writing, like the ideas and the next, scenes and things like that don't actually come to me unless I'm in the process of actually writing. And I love the way it's like I write longhand. No, I'm on a keyboard. However, if I get stuck, I do write longhand. But so I feel like bravery is the key thing, right? And I feel like last week when we were talking about the golden shadow. So I'm thinking golden shadow, creativity, zone of genius. It's all like you do have to be brave to just, I feel like you do have to be brave to look at yourself and what it is you could put out there, right? You have to be intentional. You have to actually decide to do it. And I am really mad about this, but you have to be consistent too. Like,
And you have to be okay with it not being good.
oh God,
Like,
yes.
how many, is it Nora Roberts or somebody else? But like, you can't edit a blank page. Maybe you
Nora
said
Roberts.
earlier,
Yep.
right? Like,
Hmm.
sometimes you just have to write and write and write and write, and then go back and then see what's there. And
So I can't tell you how many times I've written like a whole first chapter and then just cut like the maybe of the first chapter, at least half of it, because all of this stuff up here was just like, and then she did this and walked down here and did that. And it was just getting into it. And then all of a sudden the story starts, right?
Mhm.
So, yeah, I agree with that.
And I think there's also, so I have a friend, and I think she listens, so if I get this wrong, please feel free to correct me, but she's a photographer, and she's also a traveler, and she's had many, many experiences and taken many, many photos of cool things. And I think she may have been feeling kind of stunted in her creativity this past year, or just the limitations that the P word have put on everybody. But so she went back and she took those photos from before, and now her new idea is to turn them into a book on that subject.
Oh,
And so she's taking, it's like the creation never stops, right? Like, books can become movies, photographs can become books, like there's all these different ways you can go, places you
mhm.
can take things.
Oh my
Your
gosh.
garden can pivot you into floral arranging or cooking or herbology. Like, there's just so many different ways your creativity can come out of other
Yeah.
hobbies. So like, let's say you're kind of starting to outgrow a hobby, you're just not feeling that spark. What can it turn into? Like, what could you still use those supplies for? What could you use the past final products from, or the connections or whatnot? Like, it's creativity is boundless. I think it doesn't stop with a final project. Like, either it's going to inspire you or somebody else, and then go into other things.
Yeah, I love that idea of just looking at something and saying, what else could I do with this? What are other things that I could do with this? Um, I feel like that is something we get married to an idea, right? Or to a way of doing something. And it's very hard to actually disassociate ourselves from that and then look at it from a different aspect. But when we start to do that, you're building a muscle of being able to do that. I eventually did give birth to that baby. And so you can do things like that, right?
Yeah.
That didn't quite go with this, but I did want everyone to know that he
No,
was
it
born.
absolutely did. You did have the baby.
Yeah. Yeah. So I know that we talked a little bit. You were like, if you don't know what you're good at, like what's your zone of genius, or like what do you see in me that's creative?
Yeah.
Like I loved it that you said ask your friends, not the critical ones. And I feel like you're really good at that. I'm not that good at asking people what I'm good at. And I think I need to get better at that.
But you
But what
also are
else do you
so good
do?
at so many things. Like I'm my own worst critic. I'm so hyper focused that I have a hard time seeing those things, and so I appreciate the people who are willing to be to be a mirror for me when
Yeah.
I can't see that.
Which I think it's so interesting because you and I have talked about this before too. That whole idea that you can look at someone else and see exactly like, oh, this is your thing right here, right?
Yeah.
But it's hard for you to turn that mirror on yourself.
It really, I can look at so many people and be like, what do you mean you're not creative? You do blah, 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 blah. You know, like you here's the 10 things I saw today. We're 5 minutes into brunch. And just it's so apparent it like shines off of them. But yeah, you can be
Yeah.
your own worst critic, you can get in your own way. I think sometimes mental health impacts creativity. And so whether a lack of creativity led to, poor mental health, or just feeling depressed or anxious gets in the way of creating, and so if that's something you're struggling with, I say just start, like we were just talking about. Just pick something and just make. Don't worry about an outcome. Pick up Play-Doh, like who cares, like just
Honestly, and I think then the gift of that is that so often the act of creating something actually helps your mental health. It can help you feel more connected to yourself and to the world around you. um so yeah, just start and don't share it with anyone. No one has to see it, right?
Nope.
It's just
You
your
could burn it.
process.
You could burn it. Like that's what I tell myself all the time when it comes to my writings and my journal stuff. Is like you can freehand it and you can light it on fire. Like
You can. And believe me, I've been like, we need a fire. I gotta burn some shit.
one of my favorite matchbooks I've ever seen online is it says you can delete an email, but you can burn a letter. And I was like, ain't that the truth? Like just
Yeah, exactly. I love it.
but you can,
So
like, how many times I've done something and I've worked really hard at it and I've done everything you're supposed to do and I've like let the creativity flow and I look at it and just the final product, like it's just ugh, like it's just not what it was or was meant to be, and just turn it into something else. Like they just use some major technology to unearth a Picasso under a Picasso. Like there's like even these great Da
even
Vinci
he wasn't happy
people,
with his first
yeah,
effort.
yeah, they have all these canvases and like these great works of art are over medium works of art. Like I would not say it was trash. It looked gorgeous if this is
Medium
real.
works of art. Create medium works of art.
Yeah, and everybody, and don't assume that when your friends or people around you tell you that something's really good or that you did a great job that it's lip service, because you're thinking of yourself, you know more about what you're doing, you know what your intentions were. You can't be the judge of your final product. If other people
Ooh,
tell you they're great, if they're
yeah.
amazed at it, you got to take
Yeah.
it, it's given to you.
Yeah. No, I think that is so true. I think some other things too, if it's like with creativity, like think about a kid and how a kid creates, and a kid could care less, right? They're just like,
They're
mess that one up. Give me another page from the coloring book. Like, get a coloring book. You don't even have to get an adult coloring book. You can get a kid coloring book and get those Crayola crayons out. I mean, it's amazing what that can do, just coloring. Like if you're around any little kids and they want you to color with them, there is just something so freeing about that. And that can help. Doodling, just weird little doodles. Like,
Gets you out of your head.
yeah, it does. It gets you out of your head. And as far as like more zone of genius stuff, like I know we talked about this before. Like, so you see things in other people, what they're doing. Also, like think back to when you were younger. What were your dreams? What did you want to do? Is that something you could do today?
I ran at 9 years old a card making company in my neighbor's garage.
Oh my God, of course you did.
I had these really funny stencils, kind of like caricatures with like big heads and then different smaller bodies or vice versa. And they were like these plates. And so you could mix and match, kind of like a Mr. Potato Head effect, or Potato Head. He's not gendered anymore. Love that. But so and then all these kids would come up with these designs, or they were just good drawers and they would draw and then they'd give them to me and I'd come up with the witty captions. And like it was like, honestly, Amy, when I look back at it, I think of it like those old-timey newspaper reporting offices of like the bull's pen of like all these desks in a row and people working furiously and people shouting out ideas. Just like I was determined to be a famous card maker. I'm sure it was all crap. I'm sure our parents were just really good at being like, oh, tell me about it. No, but I loved it. And I was 9. There were kids older than me in that room coming to me for advice for writing their quotes for the inside of cards.
Oh my gosh.
And now I did not take that anywhere, except there's a certain line of cards at Hallmark that I absolutely love called Fresh Ink. And they're that type of humor that I was striving for. And very few Hallmarks have them, and very rarely do they release new cards, and they go away when different seasons come about. And so I will go out and I will drop like $60 on cards when I find them. I'll tailor pick them, have people in mind, and then I'll have like 2 years of cards in mind for people or other things. And my family will be like, they'll open it, and without like this recognizing the handwriting, the envelope, or anything else, be like, "Ooh, it's a Tracy card." But in my head, whenever they do that, I was like, God, that would be a great name when I launch my card making company, right? Like,
it's a Tracy card.
It's a Tracy card.
I love it.
But like there are all these people these days that like with Etsy and letterpress machines and like the internet and getting equipment and I just never do it because it's like, oh, I missed my mark. Like, oh, there's already people doing that. But like then they started, or even just like, oh, you're not like that kind of crafty or creative, like you're not that witty. But then I also tell myself, like, you're not trying to be. Like, I don't need a lot of wit and risk management.
Oh,
you know?
My gosh. There's a whole list in here from Elizabeth Gilbert about why you don't do
Why you
like
don't.
why you don't. And it's basically, you already mentioned some of them. Her list goes on for 2.5 pages. So everybody's got all kinds of lists of why they don't do stuff.
But that was 9-year-old Tracy. 9-year-old Tracy ran a card making company and would try and sell it to her parents and other neighbors. And it was just like printer paper with pencil stencil drawings on it.
But you were working with the tools that you had at the time, but also that whole thing about, well, somebody's already done it. Too many people have done it. I'm not as good as them. Bullshit. Because there are things that I see online that I'm like, oh, I made that. Like, it's sitting behind me. I made that. I could have done that. Oh, this thing that person just said in their reels. Yeah. Y'all know how many times I've said that, and they just said it. They emoted it the right way. And now they got 1,000 likes. Okay. I'm not bitter. I am not bitter.
I'm not bitter. I'm sour just a little bit.
It's just my golden shadow is bitter.
I'm not bitter. I'm just a little salty. Like
I'm just a pirate.
You know, that reminds me of like how many people look at something and go, oh, I could have made that. You know, like that's not worth $900. I could have made that for 30. Well, if you want something, do it at cost. You know, if you want something for cost, do it yourself. Like that's the point. Like my time, energy, labor, materials, equipment, like depreciation, like everything went into this. And then there are all those people that like even look at something or look at abstract art and is like, that's not art. I could have done that. Well, you didn't.
You didn't. And so my sister will always say, I'm always like, I could make that. And then she'll look at me and say, but will you? And I go, no. So let me just buy that.
A bad word or a mean name, and then also be like, well, that's brilliant and so motivating. Like that shows how not bitter I am in the moment. But like I could go in 2 directions and you want to say that to me on a particular topic.
But will you? Yeah. But honestly, I feel like if you're still just like, I don't know. You know what we're going to tell you. Spend some time with yourself. Go deep inside. Meditate. Journal.
Cheer guides.
Actually, do you know what I would love to take a discovery vacation. I think I just coined that term. I think I did a discovery
Trademark word.
vacation,
I'm now going to create that travel company.
right? And we're
Copywritten,
going
whatever.
to create a whole retreat around it as a discovery vacation, discovery for your, but we can't use the term zone of genius because we didn't come up with that.
You could talk to him. Maybe he'd be into it. We got
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe he would. But I know we say this to the listener every single time because we really mean it. You gotta go deep. You gotta go inside yourself. And that's
then,
just,
go back through our episodes if you haven't been listening in order. Like, let's say you do want to write a book. Like, you've identified that's what's going to bring you joy. It's where your skill set is. You have an ultimate goal of a publication date. Go back to our goal setting episode. Turn it into a goal. Like, still, like, create that space for that spark to burn.
I should probably go back to our goal setting episode, even though I'm the one who like said, yeah, let's do one on goals. I should probably go back and listen to it because I need to get back
it goes back
into it.
well, I'll jump ahead a little bit here. So our next episode is going to be on Beltane, right? And the wheel of the year, otherwise May Day. And so for me, I do cycles. So every 6 weeks is a new year for me. It's a new opportunity to set a goal or to revisit a goal or be like, well, I let that one just fly by me. To just kind of refocus and reset. So just know like that time is coming. Like you don't have to start on a Monday. You don't have to start on the first of the month. You don't have to start in any particular fashion. You just have to start.
Yeah. Yeah. As we're, and as we're talking about this, obviously it'll come out after, but as we're recording this, 2 days from now is the new moon. And that's always a great time to say what you want to create. Guess what? If you miss it, it's okay. You can still say what you want to create. Like it's still there. You're still a person. You still have goals and dreams and golden shadows.
You have to follow your own internal schedule for some things too.
Yeah.
Not everything is about the stars or the zodiac or the day of the week or the quarter you're in. Like if you're feeling it, birth it.
Yeah. Also, I would add to that, it's not about your age either. Because
Julia Child started in her 40s. Like
that's right. That's right. So don't worry about that. So I was very pleased with what the universe had to say to us when I was writing the show notes. And then I just went, okay, I'm really going to center myself. And what does the collective need to know about creativity and zone of genius? And I got,
oh, that card haunts me.
I know, but you know what? So the 7 of cups, you can see 7 cups, each with something different in the cup.
And the cups are floating in the sky.
Yes. And the person is looking at them like, which one will I choose? But here's the thing with the 7 of cups that I had never really thought of before. Often people will say some of the cups are good and some have like, ooh, bad things in them. But that's not actually true because even the cups that have like, there's a cup with a snake in it. And yes, a lot of times people are like snakes, ooh, evil. Well, guess what? Snakes are actually like the snake is a symbol for doctors, medicine, right?
Yeah.
For
it's Kundalini, your energy.
Kundalini. It's wisdom. It's a grace. The same with the dragon. Dragons can be fierce and evil. Well, guess what? Chinese dragons are lucky beyond belief. So it depends on how you're viewing it. So I would say this kind of goes back to that upper limits thing too, the upper limits problem where it's like, oh, I have this lucky dragon. When's it going to turn on me and blast me with fire, right? Don't do that. The other thing is there's one cup that has like this mystery ghost in it. It's not really a ghost, but it looks like a ghost. And instead of that one being ominous, that's like, I feel like that one is choose your own adventure.
Ooh. And isn't that life, right? The best way to know your future is to create it.
You do. You have to create it. So I don't know. I know that this card haunts you.
It has just because, in the past.
Yes.
So in the past, I had a lot of choices. I had a lot of decisions. I was really indecisive. but I also wasn't being very intentional with my life. I was just like letting life happen. And the 7 of Cups card,
Mm,
I would just move my deck and it would pop out of the middle of the deck. I would ask specific questions and it would come out and I'd be like, no, thank you. And I'd put it back in and then it would pop out again. And it was just always there. But recently I heard somebody describe it when it came up in a reading as quit daydreaming and do the damn thing.
oh, shit.
Yeah, so often that we put these projections of the good and the bad, what it can be, but we're not taking action. It's really kind of a card of pre-action, right? You have all those choices in front of you.
Yeah.
What will you take? Will some of them are they trying to trick you? You know, things like that, because it could be good or bad. But in all actuality, you create all of it. And so just
I love that action.
yeah,
Yeah. So
for
instead
me,
of just
stop
dreaming about
thinking
creating
about it and do it.
something,
Mhm.
yeah, do it. I love it. So yeah, you kind of brought up the fact that we're going to do Beltane next time with all this
It's
rain right
almost
now. I
May.
know. So as once again, as we're recording this, we're on like, I don't know, the 75th day of rain, not really, maybe just like 4 days of rain. But it was like after the first big rain, I looked outside and it was just like boom,
It's so great.
buds and
Yeah.
green and just beautiful. And then the other day, was it a Sunday? Rick called me over to the window. He's like, you have to look at this. We had 5 or 6 bunnies in our
Minimum.
backyard.
Yeah, she
What?
shared it at sorry, it wasn't at her house. She shared it on Instagram, but she
Yes,
had at minimum 5 or 6 bunnies in her yard.
minimum. And they were happy and frolicking and doing other things. And so I was just like, yep, Beltane, it's
Beltane,
coming up.
spring is here. So what are we gonna in our next episode, episode 18, we'll be talking a
Yes.
little bit about that. And
Talk about ways to celebrate and
yeah.
just kind of what it means.
And what I love about Beltane, so I talk about like every 6 weeks is kind of a new year.
Mhm.
When you think about like the science of it, the actual cosmos, not just like the astrology, because I know some people are torn on that, but it's the halfway point between the spring equinox and the summer solstice. So
Exactly.
there's a purpose to the date and what
Mhm.
is actually kind of going energetically, weather-wise, things like that. And this again
Mhm.
is all for the northern hemisphere.
Yeah.
Well, very cool. I'm so excited. So, if this episode spoke to your soul, please share it with a friend. And if you have time, give us some love on your preferred platform with a rate, review, and subscribe. You can also reach out to us via Instagram and YouTube under The Brightly Podcast or via email at brightlypodcast@gmail.com.
And with that, we hope you have a bright and beautiful day. Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Bye.